Over the years, the superlatives lavished on the McLaren F1 have been so numerous, so gushy, so over the top that the car just has to be overrated. It has to be overvalued. It can't truly be that great. Well, the verdict is in, my verdict anyhow, and let me tell you, it truly is that great. The car is worth every damn penny. All 2 billion of them. There's so much to admire about the F1, but the core of its appeal is that it's the ultimate driver's car. One owner put it aptly, asking, "How often in this world does one guy who is supremely qualified and has all the resources he needs, how often does that guy get to design and make the ultimate anything?" When it was new, McLaren allowed only one publication to do a full road test of the car, Autocar. Their first line of their 1993 conclusion says simply, "The F1 is the finest driving machine yet built for the public road." That's it. That's the essence of why the car is so great. But the true magic of the F1 is that in spite of this driver-oriented character, it is usable and benign when you want it to be, but never dull. The car was designed from the outset to be a road car, and a very good one. The men who architected this car insisted that it should be the type of car to drive from London to the south of France in genuine comfort, very different from other great drivers' cars like the Lotus 7 or Ferrari F40. And somehow the F1 does all of these things. The ride is comfortable, it has useful luggage space, it seats 3, it's beautifully made, it's compact and lightweight, the motor is designed to go 250,000 kilometers before needing an overhaul, but also sounds and goes like sex. Oh, and the performance is face-melting and joyfully delivered. Never before or since has such a complete set of attributes been combined so successfully in one car. So how did McLaren do it, and why hasn't anyone matched it since? The answer is surprisingly simple. They gave a small but stellar team the resources to do a completely clean sheet design. The origin of the car is easy to pinpoint. In September of 1988, McLaren was in the midst of trouncing everyone else in Formula 1, and 4 key men were waiting for a delayed flight at the airport in Milan on the way back from the Italian Grand Prix. 2 of McLaren's directors, their technical director, and the head of marketing. As they discussed the future of McLaren, they agreed that a road car was the way to go. Not only did they all want to make one, but it had also been Bruce McLaren's dream to do so before he was tragically killed testing one of his own cars 18 years earlier. The man responsible for the technical content of the car, Gordon Murray, is a legend. Before the F1, he designed Formula 1 cars initially at Brabham and then at McLaren. His reputation for innovation was well-deserved and his cars proved extremely successful. He pioneered the use of carbon ceramic brakes in cars after reading about the technology's use in the Concorde. It was in a Gordon Murray-designed car that Ayrton Senna won his first Formula 1 championship in 1988. Murray had always dreamt of doing a production car and was given essentially free rein to make his ideal road car. Every critical decision in the car represents Murray's philosophy. The driver sits in the middle of the car, both literally and figuratively. The packaging alone is a marvel. Murray is 6'4", and supercars of the era could rarely accommodate a tall driver, but the F1 can. By placing the driver at the middle of the car, Murray tied the car to McLaren's Formula 1 racing cars, but also solved a common supercar problem of wheel well intrusion into the driver's footwell. Normally, the pedals would be skewed towards the center line of the car to make room for the enormous wheel well required to accommodate wide performance tires. In the F1, the 2 flanking passenger seats were placed slightly behind the driver so that the widest parts of a human, the hips and shoulders, could overlap and keep the width of the car manageable. In fact, the car is less than an inch wider than a Porsche Boxster and 6 inches narrower than an F40 despite seating 50% more people and having more luggage space. For dynamic reasons, Murray kept the weight within the car's wheelbase. A car turns most easily when the weight is near the center, and so everything heavy is within the wheelbase. Occupants, powertrain, fuel, even luggage. The resulting layout is pure genius. The car is 10 inches shorter than a modern 911, 2.5 feet shorter than an XJ220, narrower than both, and 700 pounds lighter than either. Yet it has a mid-mounted V12 and a hell of a lot of other content. Everywhere you look in this car, there's more evidence of the genius it contains. McLaren had pioneered the use of carbon fiber chassis in their Formula One cars less than 10 years earlier, and one of the earliest defining characteristics of the F1 as it was being conceptualized was that it would have a carbon fiber monocoque. The material had proven its worth in racing, and aside from being wildly expensive, it was ideal for a road car too. In fact, so confident was McLaren's composites guy that he didn't even attend its 30-mile-an-hour barrier crash test. At that point, the F1 was the only car tested to survive in drivable condition had it been fitted with an operable engine, and Gordon Murray even tried unsuccessfully to be allowed to sit inside the car while it was crash tested. Aerodynamically, the F1 was bleeding edge too. Murray was insistent that it should be aesthetically timeless and thus felt it should not have any spoilers or wings. But it would always be a high-performance car, so it needed to generate downforce, which it did through ground effect. The radiators are split up front, providing a channel in the middle under the nose which accelerates the air under the car, which reduces pressure and increases downforce without creating drag the way a wing does. A cleverly designed rear diffuser further increased downforce while also increasing stability, enhancing engine bay cooling, and reducing drag. In the world of engineering, which consists of constant compromise, a win-win-win-win like this is exceedingly rare, yet it was routine in the F1. Gordon Murray's uncompromising driver-oriented approach meant that the car would be comprehensively analog in terms of eliminating anything that would reduce driver feedback. This meant no power steering, no traction control, no ABS, no power brakes. And for the utmost in responsiveness, the engine would have to be naturally aspirated. It would also need to be compact, have more than 8 cylinders, and deliver an absolutely searing power-to-weight ratio. The engine of the F1 was rather late to the party, which made it one of the biggest stressors of the program. In the summer of 1990, nearly 2 years after the program's inception, the McLaren team still didn't know what engine would power the car, and not having the specifics of the powertrain package also held up innumerable key other decisions for the rest of the car. In some senses, the problem was easy to solve because there were only 3 companies who had the technical capability to make the engine. It would need to be large, naturally aspirated, and have a specific output of at least 100 horsepower per liter. The only folks who could make such an engine were Ferrari, Honda, and BMW. Given the long-standing Formula One rivalry between the two companies, Ferrari was a non-starter. So it came down to Honda and BMW. Honda was the favorite because of the ongoing and very successful partnership that saw Honda-powered McLarens dominating F1 races, but they didn't seem terribly interested. Reportedly, this was because of their desire to head in a greener direction, which may have also contributed to their decision to stop making Formula One engines after the 1992 season. So that left BMW. Gordon Murray and the chief engineer of BMW Motorsport, Paul Rocha, previously had a very fruitful working relationship because the Brabhams Murray designed before joining McLaren were powered by BMW engines from 1982 to 87. The two met at the German Grand Prix in 1990 and discussed the possible collaboration, which was inked a few months later. They initially tried to use a 4-valve version of the 750i engine, but Murray quickly dismissed it as unsuitable, too heavy and not powerful enough. Murray's vision for the F1 power plant was very clear. Biggest possible displacement in the smallest possible external package, no more than 600mm in length, revving to about 7,500 RPM, weighing no more than 250 kilograms, dry sump, and rigid enough to be used as a structural member in the chassis. So BMW did a new engine, and it is an absolute masterpiece. It also went on to power BMW's Le Mans winning 1999 LMR.
Who, after all, was the designer of the car, wants to have a look and see how much damage has been caused. That's a shame. We were enjoying a closing down of the lead BMW, which we're looking at here.
During the kickoff meeting with BMW's engineers, Gordon Murray tried to convey the vision for the F1, and as always, his obsession with weight was central. He told them to question every assumption, never use a 10mm bolt where a 9mm will do. And BMW delivered. The final engine was completed quickly and was full of sophisticated but not technically risky features. BMW knew that they were on a timeline and understood that they shouldn't try any wild, unproven technologies to achieve the performance targets. Nor did they need to. The final engine was 6.4% overweight, but 14% over on power, 627 horsepower instead of the requested 550. That would do nicely. The numbers are impressive, but they don't prepare you for how sensational the engine is in real life. It's surprisingly quiet at startup, but quickly steals the show. The inherent smoothness of the V12, coupled with a small clutch and complete lack of flywheel, make it incredibly responsive. It gains and loses revs with a supernatural quickness that is electrifying. The engine was tuned so that torque climbs continuously to a lofty 5,600 RPM, but the motor is far from peaky. At 1,500 RPM, it supplies more than 80% of its peak torque. In short, the engine is a monster. It has an animalistic urgency, but only when you ask for it. Just puttering around is perfectly civilized and tractable. But slam the throttle open at any speed in any gear and the car just explodes forward. One period road test described the car as uncomfortably fast, like the physical sensations of acceleration caused discomfort. I can confirm this. The duality of the powertrain is echoed in almost every system in the car, especially the chassis. The car is softly sprung and the relatively small 17-inch wheels mean a lot of sidewall to absorb impacts, and so it rides beautifully, yet there is also incredible control. McLaren achieved this, as usual, through exceptional cleverness. Being race car folks, they knew nothing about suspension compliance, so they closely analyzed a Honda NSX, a Porsche 928, and a Jaguar XJ6. They then promptly discarded most of what everyone else was doing because compliance in suspension leads to unintended geometry changes that adversely affect handling. So in the F1, the compliant bits which isolate occupants from harshness aren't in the suspension at all. They're between the subframes that the suspension hangs on and the car's chassis. This gives race car level of control over wheel geometry changes while still isolating occupants from harshness. It's a simple but ingenious solution that gives the F1 its lovely ride but also world-beating handling. And the entire car is like this, and that's what makes it so magical. It's fast as hell but docile in town. It generates substantial downforce but very little drag. Its handling is spectacular but it rides well. It feels special and exciting, but you can drive it comfortably all day. It holds a lot of people and luggage, but is smaller and lighter than a new Porsche Boxster. The F1 is a study in having your cake and eating it too. Imagine the most delicious, decadent dessert and finding out that it gives you a six-pack and is good for your cardiovascular system. That's the F1. And there are entire systems of the car we haven't even touched on. The engine is mounted longitudinally, but the transmission is somehow transverse to keep the weight inside the wheelbase and keep the overall length of the car as short as possible. The stereo was developed specially by Kenwood and weighs half of what a conventional system does and was tested to 1.5 G. The air conditioning system was also developed from the ground up for this car and weighs half that of a conventional system. Every single window is equipped with defrosting ability thanks to a special plasma coating and a centralized DC-DC converter that McLaren developed themselves from scratch to power it. For the defroster, in essence, they considered every pain point from automobiling and used their F1 championship-winning brainpower to solve the problem in an open checkbook manner. And then they sold it to the public. Speaking of selling the car, that process was also thoroughly unconventional and quite special. The car was highly personalizable. At one point, the director of production spent an entire weekend going to grocery stores looking for the perfect eggplant in order to match its color at the request of a customer. Each car came with a nitride-coated toolkit, a Tag Heuer watch, full-fitted luggage set including golf bag, first aid kit, car cover, battery charger, detailing kit in a case numbered to match the car's serial number, and a tool cart filled with tools to keep at home. Who would need an entire cart of tools? Obviously, that would be the flying mechanics who travel from McLaren to meet the cars wherever they are in the world whenever they need maintenance. And even today, more than 25 years on, they still do this. McLaren supports the car like no other old car. The tooling to make the components still exists, and technicians will make the parts if you need them, sometimes the same technicians who built the cars new. If all that wasn't enough to convince prospective customers to buy an F1, don't worry, they had other ways. Their marketing manager was one Jonathan Palmer, who in addition to playing an active role in the development of the car and testing it to 231 miles an hour at the Nardo track in Italy, is also a Formula One racer. His job was to demonstrate the performance of the F1 on track to would-be buyers, one of whom pointedly observed after a test ride, "If he believes the way to sell me a car is to scare me witless and make me feel sick, he's got another thing coming." That customer subsequently bought an F1. Although the F1 famously set a record for being the world's fastest production car by an 18-mile-an-hour margin, a figure later revised by a further 9 miles an hour to 240.1 miles an hour a few years later after removing the rev limiter, this kind of specific performance target was not part of the original vision for the car. Gordon Murray's 1988 product definition document simply says, 200 miles an hour plus and 0 to 60 quickest available. In much the same way, the car was never intended to go racing, but it did, and in typical McLaren F1 fashion did so in spectacular fashion, winning Le Mans outright on its first outing as a lightly modified road car against a field of purpose-built racing prototypes. Like the rest of the F1's resume, that achievement is so extraordinary that it defies belief. How could one little car be capable of so much? The answer is that it is a car with incredible density. Not actual density, it only weighs 2,500 pounds, but density of thought. F1 owner Rowan Atkinson said, "It's not just the quality of construction, but quality of thinking that owners admire." That thoughtfulness never ceases to amaze. The more you look and learn, the more impressive the car is. It feels almost as if it violates the laws of nature because it has so few compromises, such dazzling clarity of purpose. Yet for all its cleverness, the best part of the car is the experience it provides, and that's a reflection of Gordon Murray's philosophy. The extraordinary talent of the F1 team could have been used for any number of purposes, but the glory of this car is that they harness this power in the name of driving pleasure. Not just a few minutes of pleasure, but pleasure that lasts all day and, as it turns out, decades. The F1 came into existence at a critical turning point in the development of the automobile. Its primary rivals were all turbocharged and incorporated various technologies aimed at making the cars perform better, easier to live with, more efficient. The F1 proudly resisted that trend, one that has only escalated in the ensuing decades. This makes the F1 an absolute revelation today. It is a monument to driving purity that typifies old cars, yet the performance of the car is still extremely contemporary. New, they cost twice as much as the next nearest competitor, which kept sales low. Just 64 road cars were sold. Simply put, it's an incredibly singular experience. There is no car that gives you 80% of the feeling of this car for 10 or even 50% of the money. Any driving enthusiast who can afford it should buy one without even a moment of hesitation, not because they'll continue to appreciate, which they will, but because nothing else comes close.